Good afternoon, my name is Abby and I am the OTS that did an assessment with your child. Before we begin, would you mind verifying your name and date of birth for me? Not your name, I'm sorry, your child's name and date of birth. Thank you. So before we begin, I'm going to talk about the assessment, what the assessment measures, what it looks at, and then I'm going to explain the scoring. And then I'll explain your child's scoring, and then we'll talk about observations and recommendations for your child. Do you have any questions before we begin? Awesome. So what we use to assess your child is we use the PDMS, and the PDMS stands for Peabody Developmental Motor Scale. And the Peabody Developmental Motor Scale has several different subtests in it. So it has reflexes, stationary locomotion, object manipulation, grasping, visual motor integration. And the specific part that I looked at was eye-hand coordination. And within each subtest, they have scores. So they have this thing called a raw score. And what we do is we have 0, 1, and 2, and that's how we measure the task at hand. So for eye-hand coordination, we're looking at like, maybe we have her stacking blocks, right? So we're doing like fine motor. And we're having her stack blocks, or we're having her like pick up a Cheerio and put it into a container, right? So we're working on all those like tiny hand movements. And so within each subtest, specifically this one, we're looking at a 0, 1, or 2, which is how we rate it. So a 0 means that like the child can't or won't attempt the item. But a 0 is not necessarily a bad thing. So what we do for each subtest is we start within their age range within the subtest. And then we're going to work forward, and then we're going to work backwards within that. So we wait until we get the ceiling, and the ceiling is when we get 3 2s. Well, once we know that we have the 3 2s, 3 zeros. 3 zeros are our ceiling. Our baseline are 3 2s. So our ceiling is like, that is the max amount she can get, right? Like she can no longer do any more of the items. We are at 3 zeros, and then we work until we get 3 2s, which we know is her baseline, and we know that she can do everything below the 3 2s. And so what we do is we add up all the numbers, so all the zeros, all the ones, all the 2s, and then that is her raw score. And so if you see a 0 or 1, don't freak out. 0s and 1s aren't necessarily a bad thing. It just means that she has exceeded like that area, right? So she can no longer do those things, but that's okay, because it might be that that's out of her age bracket, which means she's totally fine. Everything's fine. It just means she just can't do some of those things outside of her age bracket. So don't panic if you see a 0 or a 1. They're fine. And then also let's talk about standard score and what it is. So a standard score, standard scores are, so they're scaled scores, which is used in the PDMS, which is a type of standard score that provides like the clearest indication of a child's subtest performance. So they have different like categories. So for instance, the subtest scaled scores, we have like 1 to 3 is impaired or delayed, 4 to 5 is borderline impaired or delayed, 6 to 7 is below average, 8 to 12 is average, 13 to 14 is above average, 15 to 16 is superior, and 17 to 20 is gifted or very advanced. So it's just like a range within like where your kid falls. So that's what the standard score is for. And then also like when we have norms are like typical scores for children of that age bracket. So a typical score could be 8, and then like your child scored within, you know, that range, an 8. So norms are just typical for that age group. And then also let's talk about like what reliability and validity is of the test and how it is upheld. So reliability measures the same thing over and over again. So with the PDMS, if you use the same thing, like the same test, and you administer it the same way, it is a reliable test because you're doing the same items over and over and over again, which is what makes it reliable. And then like the validity, it means that it measures what you want it to measure. So if we're looking at her eye-hand coordination, and we're trying to figure out like pinch and stuff, it means that like what we're looking at, like if we're looking to see if her eye-hand coordination is off, we would use this test to measure that. That would mean that it's measuring what we want it to measure, and it's giving us like an accurate depiction of that. And then also like percentile scores. So a percentile score looks at where your child is out of like 100%. And the easiest way that I feel like I can explain this is, let's say that you have 100 children and your child scores 75%. So they're in the 75 percentile. That means that like they are the 75th person out of 100. So like they are in like the top bracket for that percentile. So 75% would be a good thing. So that's what percentiles are. And if you have any more questions about that, we can discuss that too. And also, if I don't make anything clear, please let me know and I will make sure that I explain it as best as I possibly can. And then also let's talk about age equivalency. And so age equivalency is like, it tells you where your kid is performing the age equivalent for where your kid is. So your child is at 31 months. So if she was performing exceptionally well, it could be above that. So it could say that her age equivalency is at 36 months instead, based on how she tested. Or if it was less, it would be, you know, she might be performing at 30 months instead of 30. So that's just like an indication of like where other kids are performing at, like the other kids are performing at her age range, or where she stands in accordance to where other kids are, if that makes sense. Okay, and then standard error. So standard error can be a little bit confusing. Standard error indicates how different the population mean is likely to be from the sample mean. So it's like your outliers. So your standard error is like outside of that normal range. And then, okay, so now that I've kind of discussed like the different parts, I'm going to talk to you about what her scores were and what they mean. I'll just go over them just a little bit more. So her standard score for eye-hand coordination was an 8, which is good. It means that she was falling within the average bracket, because I believe, let me look real quick, the standard score for her is 8 to 12, so she's within that bracket, which is good. Her percentile rank is at 25%, so she was at 25. Which again, if we were looking at that 100, it'd mean that she was at like the 25th out of like the 100th student. And then her age equivalency, I know she's at 31 months, and her age equivalency is at 22 months. But also, I know that those last two numbers probably seem like a little funny to you and you probably want to discuss them a little bit more, but don't freak out. So from my observations, I think that she is quite capable of doing all of the items that were on the test. I think that she was just not comfortable with me. And then it was at the end of the day, her dad came in. Like, I just think that the testing environment was not appropriate for her. So I don't think that this test is an indicator of what she's capable of. So what I would like to do and what I recommend is that we would retest. Maybe we could use a different assessment. Maybe we could do something non-standardized so that it would be like her parent could be in there. We could have someone who she's comfortable with that would help me with testing. Because like I said, I don't think that this test was a good indicator of what she's capable of. I think that she did great, honestly. I just think that she wasn't comfortable, and so she didn't perform the best that she could. So I just wouldn't get too upset about the scoring, because like I said, I don't think it's an indicator of how she actually performs. So do you have any questions for me? Okay, awesome. It was very nice to meet you. Like I said, I would like to retest and we can work from there. Okay, thank you.